In this video, we're going to be sharing 5 things you need to know about investing in real estate. And I'm joined by Grant Schroeder, who is both a lender at Movement Mortgage and has bought 6 properties of his own over the past 7 years. So we're not going to be sharing silly investor hacks that don't work and that are just for headlines and clicks. These are things that actually work, that are repeatable, that you can use if you're beginning your investing journey. So we're going to be talking about things like the perspective you have to have as an investor. We're going to talk about things like HELOCs. We're going to be talking about creative financial solutions. So there's quite a bit to cover. Yeah. So let's go ahead and get started.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, Grant, well, thanks for joining me today. I know we've got a lot to cover. The very first thing to talk about, you started your investor journey, what, about like 7 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And you have to have a different perspective as an investor. So can you talk about that first? Like, what's the perspective you have to actually go through this process of being a real estate investor?
Yeah, before even diving into numbers, it definitely begins with your mindset. Being willing to do things that others won't in the moment, to be able to do things that others can't in the future. It's going to definitely take short-term sacrifices, but it is a longer-term outlook. One of the things I love about real estate is being able to build generational wealth, and that takes time. It's slow and steady. Let compound interest do its thing, and that's one of the things I love helping clients do as well, is follow that same blueprint.
So a lot of people, I've even heard this saying, like, you should never use your own money to buy investment property. But every investor that I've helped buy a home, like, you have to have money saved. Like, most of those solutions just don't work in the real world. So talk about, like, what you actually need to have saved. Because the other side of that is people say, oh, you need to have like 20-25% down. But there's actually a different way of doing this, right? So, like, how much do you need to have saved to do this?
Typically, so we began our journey more from a personal finance perspective, trying to play defense, save as much money as we can, putting away 40 to 50% of our income. So many people get in trouble in real estate or over leverage because they don't have reserves, they don't have savings. So I started with house hacking, buying property, renting out units, trying to limit my housing expense before even realizing, hey, this is a strategy I can use in real estate, trying to build my personal financial fortress first before going out and buying property.
So, like, real numbers, like, how much do you have to save per month to start this process?
Typically, we're probably saving between $1,500 and $2,000 per month. When I was first in engineering on a salary, we're probably saving 40 to 50% of our take-home pay. Okay, so that's significant, and I think that's a level of sacrifice. You don't have to have $10,000 a month. You do have to have enough to be able to save that, but that's doable. Like, if you're in the stage, like, you have 2 decent incomes and you're in the spot where you're thinking of investing, you can continue to do that. You may have to sacrifice some things, but it's possible. It's hard work. And that's one of the things that I'm excited for this video together is it's a repeatable path. It's something that other people can do. So the second thing I want to talk about after perspective is you talked about house hacking. Like, so what is house hacking? What does that actually mean? How can someone use that to start their investing process? And we use house hacking, which I'll start by defining. Someone can buy a home, whether rent out bedrooms or buy a duplex, live in one side, rent out the other unit, or buy a home with an ADU, an additional dwelling unit, rent that out. It's basically turning your home, which is normally could just be a payment going out of your pocket, to being able to generate income. We used house hacking as part of playing defense. One of the kind of the books that I want to say modeled my life after is called Set for Life by Scott Trench. And his focus on the personal finance side is attacking the 3 biggest expenses in your life: transportation, housing, and food. Transportation by living close to work, food by budgeting, typical financial advice, but the biggest one, house hacking, limiting your housing expense.
Which, a side note on transportation, also is the kind of car you drive. So what car do you drive?
A paid off 2008 Toyota Tacoma.
Which a lot of people would think they need to buy a brand new Tesla to show their success and all that, but it's or pick your luxury vehicle of choice. So that's a lot of sacrifice too. I feel that in my 20-year-old Camry of I sometimes just want a car to show people to make it look like I'm much more successul than as Camry does. But
gets us from A to B. It gets the job done. It's not
does.
flashy, but it's reliable.
It's going to last after my kids are gone. So that's one part of it. Now share your story of you started with buying your first property and now you own 6 after 7 years. So what did that journey look like?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it was playing defense with our budget, but second of all was just taking consistent action. People don't realize how quickly they can build momentum in anything in life, whether real estate or any goal or dream they have, just by taking consistent action. So the first property, before I was married, I put 3% down. Then when we got married, we did 5% down on a duplex, 5% down on a single family home, and 5% down on our current home. So 4 out of our 6 have been live-in properties that we have house hacked, rented out a unit, rented out rooms, trying to get creative with it.
Now, and a little side note here is, I think a lot of people aren't aware that you can buy, were those all with FHA? Actually, it couldn't have all been with FHA because you can only have one at a time. So what kind of loan, because most people think, oh, you have to have at least a 15% down payment to buy an investment property, but talk about like you actually don't need that.
That's one of the wonderful things about house hacking. Buying with a primary residence loan, you're an owner occupant, you're getting to utilize a low down payment. I mean, we even have solutions at Movement Mortgage where you can get down payment assistance. You can put 0% down. You can even get 1.5% towards your closing costs and almost bring nothing out of pocket. But we used FHA once, and then every single time since then has been conventional. So just really simple, nothing crazy, but just consistent every 12 to 15 months, continuing to save and buy the next property.
Which is pretty amazing that you can actually do that. Now, again, you have to keep your expenses low, and there's a lot of things you have to budget for. So the next thing I want to talk about is HELOCs. Okay. So HELOCs are essentially home equity line of credit, but there's also it's called a HELoan, where is actually a loan on your equity. So can you talk about what those are, what the difference is, and how someone can use that to invest?
Yeah. So home equity line of credit, HELOC, it is a line of credit that is placed on your home in second lien position behind your first mortgage. The benefit of it is you can take out the HELOC, but you only pay interest on the money when you draw. You think of it like a credit card on your home. So if you don't use it, it's just sitting there. It's additional reserves beyond your liquid cash you've set aside. The downside is a HELOC is typically going to be variable. So that can fluctuate depending on Federal Reserve and several other factors. But a HELoan, a home equity loan, the positive of it is that it's a fixed rate. You know what your payment is. You can amortize it over 20 or 30 years. But the downside is you're paying interest on it from day one when you close on that loan. So whether you choose to use it immediately, you're still paying interest on it, even if that money is sitting in a checking savings account.
Yeah. So that's something that's helpful. The other part of that is as you have an investment property, there's things to know that when you have a primary, there's a few things there. Your interest rate is better overall. Like if it's the first one you're buying, you're going to get a better interest rate as a primary versus if you're buying an investment. Same thing with an equity line. So if you get an equity line on a property that's your primary residence, you're going to get a better rate because you're lower risk than if you try to then get an equity line on something that's a rental property. So you had a strategy that was actually to, before ever leaving that home and buying your next primary residence, opening a HELOC, because then you get to keep that interest rate. Can you talk about that and why that's an advantage?
Yeah, typically home equity lines of credit, like you said, on investment properties, you have a worse rate, but you also cannot borrow as much against the home. Your combined loan to value is much lower. It's limited. It's much harder to get it once it's become an investment property. So before we'd move out of a home, maybe in month 8, 9, 10, before moving out after the year mark, we'd get a home equity line of credit. Now, we wouldn't draw on it. We'd just have it there, because one of the biggest inhibitors to people building momentum and continuing to do this over and over again is they have debt equity in their properties. Like, they can't access it. So my way of accessing it was getting that HELOC, having it there, whether it was additional reserves beyond liquid cash, or if a furnace went out, or if you have an emergency repair that's needed, that HELOC is there and you can draw from it.
Yeah. So it's a really important, actually, because you can't have access to it once you're gone. So you can actually have multiple home equity lines on multiple primary residence is, even though they're not your primary residence anymore, which is, I think a lot of people wouldn't intuitively think that. So the other concern someone might have is over leveraging. You have to make sure, and that's a big part of this, is like if you're investing in real estate, you have to be careful so that you don't get out over your skis and then go bankrupt, right? So how do you consider that throughout all of this?
Yeah, good question. Part of it for me is it starts with that personal financial fortress. I mean, if you have a payment, if you're drawing on your HELOC, that's going to get factored into your debt to income ratio when it comes to underwriting. But that's something to always be cautious about, especially with the variability of it. You want to make sure you have a plan to pay it back over time. It's there for emergency, or if you want to do renovations with it. But it's something to be very cognizant of. You don't want to max that thing out and you've almost fully leveraged your property to 90-95%, and you almost feel stuck if you don't have a plan to pay that back.
So the next part is renovations. I've had a lot of people, they buy a home that needs a lot of fixing up. Maybe they pay $50,000 less for it. They get in and they think, oh, maybe this is going to cost, $30,000, $40,000, and they'll have some equity from that. Sometimes it ends up they're paying $60,000 to $80,000. So actually paying more after the renovations were done than the value of the property. Have you experienced that at all?
As the saying goes, typically you want to plan for taking 2 times as long for the renovation project, but also costing twice as much. And my advice for people getting started, I know it can feel a little daunting. It's definitely a sacrifice living in a home. You're fixing it up over time. It's not easy. Not everyone does it. But maybe start with a cosmetic fixer. Maybe something you're painting, replacing flooring or carpet. The more you can learn and DIY yourself, the more equipped you are if you're wanting to buy more properties over time. Eventually you can hire those things out to a contractor, but just being able to communicate with a contractor, having done the work, knowing the quality you want, being able to speak their lingo goes a long way as you continue to buy property, because eventually your time becomes more and more valuable, and contractors can typically do it better, but it's good. It's good to learn through the process. So.
And so that's building that sweat equity can be helpful. You just have to, like, what are some things to watch out for that might be a red flag of like, hey, maybe that's like too much work to get into?
Yeah, you want to be, very cognizant of the value you're adding to your home. There are different types of renovations that are going to add more value than others. You're getting a higher return on investment for the money you're investing, but you always want to, typically we'd plan to go over like 100, whatever we thought it would cost, you'd go 150% more. So you have some buffer there, but knowing, hey, I'm going to put $30,000 or $25,000 into this property, having a buffer, but that's going to add $50,000, $60,000 in value, building sweat equity or forcing appreciation over time.
The last thing I want to talk about is some creative financing. So there's conventional financing, there's FHA loans. These are kind of the most typical. Once you've gotten a few properties, well, actually there's 2 things. So that we'll talk about. The first one is if you've got several properties, usually, or there's other situations where it works, but that's the DSCR loan. So the debt service coverage ratio, right?
Yes,
so
sir.
What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, debt service coverage ratio. Typically in residential real estate, we're focusing on a 1.0 ratio, which that means the gross rents that are coming from the property on a lease need to equal or exceed the total mortgage payment. Functions very similar to a commercial loan, but commercial is going to be higher requirements, 1.2 to 1.3. But if someone has bought 10 properties, or maybe they're self-employed and they don't show enough income for a conventional loan, a DSCR loan can be a great alternative to help someone qualify based on the income from the property, not their personal income, and continue to buy property.
And then the second one is maybe for someone who they don't quite have the investment they need, or maybe they're not ready to move out from their home. They want to invest in another property, but you've actually done properties where you've bought it in partnership, right? So what does that look like? What are some things to think about when doing that?
A lot of times it will come down to the personal relationship. You want to be very careful. You think of it almost like a marriage. You're partnering with someone, your finances are getting intertwined, but finding that right person and forming a partnership allows you to build momentum that much faster, like we talked about, taking consistent action. If I had 2 of the 6 properties that we've bought, we've had business partners on. And I've been very grateful to have those people in my corner, because it came down to, hey, you could have 100% of no property, or you could have a half of a property and continue to look at the long term, focus on building generational wealth through real estate. So that's been a great asset to continue to scale when we didn't have all the money necessarily right then ourselves.
Which I think is maybe this is the point where it's touching on, because I think there's a lot of people in that situation. They're saving, but and if you're wanting to buy in partnership, you're going to need 15. How much do you need down? What programs do you have?
Typically, your minimum is going to be 15 to 20% down. Okay. Or if you're buying a second home or vacation rental, say in another market or a vacation spot, you can put as little as 10% down with a partner. So 5% out of your pocket and 5% from someone else.
And I guess people should reach out to you directly to figure out what that is, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have contracts in place, right? About how this all works, who's doing what, and lay it all out, right? What do you suggest for people who are thinking this? Maybe they've talked about, maybe with a family member, hey, we should go in on this together. What advice would you give for someone doing that?
Yeah, good question. So the biggest thing is being aligned in your goals and your values. The partners I work with, we share similar principles, views on life. We both share the same faith background, where we agree on what real estate is for the long term. We want to hold the property. It's not trying to make a quick buck. It's slow and steady over time. Making sure you're equally yoked with those partners. You share similar values, and those can change over time. Those are conversations you want to continue to have. Yeah. Life happens, people go through different chapters, but the biggest thing being having similar values, but also continuing to communicate about what those are if they're changing and where people are at in life.
Do you use an attorney to draft those up, or do you kind of make your own agreements?
We've kept it pretty simple with our own operating agreements. We've had things notarized. You have filings with the state, you're filing separate business returns. Yeah. So we haven't involved an attorney, but we've been very careful in how we've set it up so all parties are represented fairly.
If someone had questions about, we've talked about a lot of different things. If someone's like, hey, I'm interested in this, I've got questions about this, can people reach out to you and ask questions and figure out, okay, what's the next step I need to take?
Yes, please do. I love diving into people's situations and just like game planning. Even if you feel like you're 6, 12, 18 months out, you just want to talk about these concepts and kind of lay the foundation, maybe see where you're at. I love being able to game plan with people. This is where you're at, but asking them, hey, what's your goal? I want to learn more about you, but what is long-term? Do you want to buy multiple properties? Do you want to do this once or twice? Let's get together and figure out how we can build a path towards that.
Yeah, which is actually kind of like a bonus tip, is like having a team around you who can help you and advise you in the right situation. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons I like working with Grant for people who are doing investment properties, is because you have the experience. You can coach people from like, hey, I've actually done this. This is what works. Here's what you need to watch out for. And you're getting much more than a lender, even though you have great products, great solutions, great interest rates. But you're really getting a full package. You're kind of getting like a financial coach in a lot of ways, and an investment coach for real estate, which is really important, because if you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what to watch out for. So if you're interested, my information is right there in the description. I'll throw Grant's information down there as well. Okay. You can send either of us an email. We'd be happy to help out. Hopefully this information is helpful. If you've got questions, also leave them in the comments. We'll try to answer them there. I will, and I'll ask Grant but yeah, reach out either way. And that's about it. So hopefully this is helpful as you begin your real estate investing journey, and we look forward to catching you in the next video.